bless Kyle and his team, Joshua, and each and every one of us here present, that as we listen to this word that's been sown in us, just like the mustard seed, that it may take root in us, that it may grow according to your will. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Awesome. Thank you, Father Kevin. And thank you for Peter in helping set up this presentation. And last of all, thank you everyone for coming out. This is one of my favorite presentations to give, and it's really exciting to see a great crowd here. And I want to open with a question. Just by a show of hands, how many people here have had a conversation with someone about abortion, a conversation in which you disagreed with the person? Yeah? Okay, so a lot of hands. That means we're having the conversation. That's great. I love to see that. And how have those conversations gone? Have they been pretty good, or a bit mid, as the kids say today? Or maybe crash and burn? I don't want to do that again. What am I thinking? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Some good ones. Ryan, always ever confident. Yeah? Awesome. And, talking about abortion can be difficult, right? Let's not kid ourselves. It can be even scary sometimes if we're being honest, right? And that's because the abortion conversation can be difficult to keep on track, to keep calm, and to keep productive. And that's what this workshop is about. It is about how do we have compassionate, compelling conversations that stay on track, that stay productive, that stay calm. Does that sound good? Yeah? Awesome. Awesome. And before we dive into the nitty-gritty details of how to talk about abortion, I think it is important that we take kind of a big picture view, that we kind of back up a little bit and look at the foundations of the conversation. What are we bringing to this conversation? And that brings me to the idea of ambassadorship. When you guys hear the word ambassador, what word or what phrase comes to mind for you? Politics? Okay, I haven't heard that one before. That's good. Okay. Someone who represents. Okay. Yeah. Any others? Promotes. Okay, so maybe someone who represents or promotes one group to another, right? A politician is supposed to be representing us, but sometimes I feel like they don't. Sorry? Goodwill? Okay. Can you elaborate on that? Trying to get the goodwill of another person on behalf of the people that we're advocating for, maybe? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, so maybe get someone to see your belief system in a different way. Yeah. Okay, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah, I think these are all good phrases, good ways of thinking about being an ambassador. And there's a lot of people, a lot of causes in the world that need ambassadors, right? Whether you think of inner city kids who need people to advocate on their behalf as being disadvantaged, whether you think about people who are navigating our medical system, right? Maybe the elderly, maybe the disabled, the sick, and especially now with something like euthanasia in our medical system, needing someone to advocate on behalf of the vulnerable, right? But who today needs an army of ambassadors more than preborn babies? Who are some of the most voiceless, the most defenseless, the most vulnerable people in our society, right? So they need somebody to represent them. They need us to represent them. And they need us to represent them well. So how do we do that, right? That's what this is about. There are 3 attributes to being a good pro-life ambassador. And I'm going to cover them here in this part of the talk. First is you must have a sound and attractive character. you must be knowledgeable on the topic, and you must be wise in your conversations. So I'll take those in reverse order just to elaborate on them a bit. By wisdom, I mean knowing when to listen and what to listen for. I mean knowing when to speak and what to say, right? And wisdom, if you're concerned about whether or not you have a lot of wisdom when you start this conversation, because wisdom comes with experience and how well you learn from that experience, right? And if you're like me, who maybe started out talking about abortion with like this little cup of wisdom, and maybe it was half full, if that, don't worry. You can grow in wisdom through having more conversations. That's one way to do it. And then the other way to do it is to not just be intentional about having more conversations about abortion, but also being intentional about learning from those conversations, right? We need to know, well, what went well in that conversation? What didn't go so well? What's an area of improvement? What's something I can take from this conversation and bring it to the next conversation about abortion, right? And if you do that, you'll grow in wisdom, okay? But it takes practice, and it takes intentionality. On knowledge is knowing, it's knowing, why are you pro-life, right? Well, human beings are made in God's image. Preborn children are human beings. They should get the same rights that we do, right? Why is someone pro-choice, right? And is it the difficult circumstances? Is it they don't believe in the humanity of the child? What is it? We'll be covering some of that stuff here today. Knowing about the situation of abortion in Canada, that we have no laws that protect any child in the womb at any stage of pregnancy, that we have about 100,000 abortions every year in this country. Knowledge is also knowing the tools to having a good conversation. And that's what we're going to cover today. A lot of the workshop is going to be on this knowledge component. And then character, that's something I want to dive in a little bit more with you. We have to keep front of mind when we're talking with people about abortion that we're talking to a person, right? Someone who's no less valuable than the babies that we're advocating for, right? And so we have to, no matter what they've done in the past or what they're doing in the conversation in the present, no matter how they're treating you, no matter what they're saying to you, right? That we have to love them, and to love them in a genuine manner, right? And I know sometimes in our conversations you can face a lot of anger when you're talking with people about abortion, right? And it's important not to take that personally, because it's not the messenger. Like, if you're conducting yourself really well, if you're being very kind and very gentle, it's not the messenger, it's the message, right? And that's because that anger stems, in many cases, from a deep woundedness that comes from abortion. We have to remember that in our culture, about 1 in 4 to 5 women will have an abortion in her lifetime. And that for every aborted child, there's not just a post-abortive mother, but there's also a post-abortive father as well who carries that same wound, whether he consented to the abortion or not, right? And there's often there's grandparents, often siblings, aunts, uncles. The shockwaves of abortion just ripple through the culture, leaving virtually no one untouched. I think everyone here in this room, whether you know it or not, has been touched by abortion in some way in your family tree, right? And so when you're faced with this anger, right, what's the proper response? Well, it's gentleness, right? Proverbs tells us that a soft answer turns away wrath, right? While a harsh word stirs up strife and anger. So really important to lead with gentleness. There's a famous quotation attributed to Martin Luther King Jr. that runs along these lines. Those that you would seek to change, you must first love, and they must know that you love them. So really important to lead with that. It's not just the right thing, it's the practical thing to do, to lead with love and gentleness. The next part of expressing good character is seeking to understand the person that you're talking with. Trying to understand, what is their position, but also why do they believe what they believe? And what is their story, and how did they get to where they are? And this is going to take active listening skills, right? And that's not something that we teach very well in our culture, right? I certainly didn't learn it growing up, how to be an active listener, how to put aside what I wanted to say so I could listen actively to what this person had to say and then respond to it. And I'm sure everyone here has been in conversations where, you're talking with somebody and you just want to get your point across, right? And you can tell that they're not listening to you. They're just waiting for you to stop talking so that they can get their point out. Has anyone ever seen that before? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. And how does that make you feel? Right, as if what you think doesn't matter, right? And why even bother talking with someone about the issue, right? I mean, don't we have better things to do than talk about a really controversial thing and not have communication actually take place anyways, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I would suggest active listening is a big skill that we need to develop. Yeah. And it can be really tempting, right, when you're talking with someone who maybe abortion hits a little bit close to home for them. It can be a little tempting to, I'm going to love them very genuinely. I'm going to empathize with them in their situation. I'm going to offer resources, maybe. I'm going to try and understand their story. I'm going to listen very carefully. And then just to kind of stop right there, right? That can be a temptation for a lot of people, especially if you don't like controversy, right? And never actually offer that different perspective, offer that pro-life position to this person because maybe you're worried about upsetting them, offending them, right? Maybe you suspect abortion is very personal to them, right? And in this case, who pays the price for our silence? Right? It's not us, right? The baby does, right? And I really want to encourage you to be willing to step into that very uncomfortable space where, there are post-abortive people. There's millions, right? And the reason why, I'll give you 3 reasons. One is that the lives of that person's future children really depend on that mom or dad being reached. So about 40 to 50% of abortions are repeat abortions. They are second, third, fourth, fifth abortions. And so, and that's not very surprising because abortion doesn't fix anybody's problems, right? It doesn't make a poor mom rich, as they say, or it doesn't make an abusive boyfriend a gentleman. It just kicks the problem down the road and you end up with a dead baby, right? And so that's one reason. Another reason is because when someone is post-abortive, unless they're repentant of that, often they're very influential in persuading other people to have abortions, right? I mean, consider this. If you were in a crisis pregnancy and you were unsure about abortion, but you knew your friend had an abortion and theirs seemed to be doing okay, wouldn't you go and ask them about it, right? And then if they're not repentant of that, if they still think their abortion was good for them, then they might say, well, I think this would be good for you. It was good for me, right? Abortion helped me, it will help you, right? It was right for me, it would be right for you. And that's what happens time and time again. So, and then finally, the third thing is, if we care about someone who is post-abortive, and we want their healing, we want their reconciliation with God, right? Then we're going to want to reach out to them in love, with compassion, but with the truth, right? Because if somebody persists in their denial about their abortion experience, then they can't heal from that. There's no reconciliation from that, because there's no reckoning with what happened, right? That just goes for any sin or any addiction for that matter, right? One of the first steps is acknowledging what happened and your role in it, right? And how it impacted other people around you. And only from there can you actually move on in any type of healing journey, right? So that's why we need to talk about abortion. That's why we need to talk about it even when it's uncomfortable, because lives are on the line and people's well-being is on the line. So those are things to consider. Kind of going forward now, we're going to be talking about the knowledge part. How do we actually have this conversation? But I think it was important to spend a little bit of time and kind of mind the depths of, like, what kind of attitudes should we be bringing into the conversation? Are there any thoughts or questions on what I've just said so far before I continue? Yeah? Okay. So when it comes to knowledge, how do we have this conversation? I don't know if you guys have ever, when you're talking about abortion or anything else really, have you ever had it kind of happen where the conversation just kind of meandered around? It wasn't really going anywhere. You know, you asked a question, they gave an answer. You asked a question, they gave an answer. But it really kind of just went off in this weird direction. You know, you started the conversation talking about the humanity of the child, and then you know, 5 minutes later, you're talking about, like, Donald Trump's tweets on Twitter or his posts on Truth Social or something. And you're like, how did I get here, right? Like, what has this got to do with abortion, right? I don't know if you guys have had that. I've had that kind of thing. But I have that a lot less now because I use a roadmap for my conversations. And I want to share this with you. This is something we've developed over thousands of conversations about abortion. So just like all roads, it leads to a destination. And the destination is that the person that you're talking with is completely pro-life. No exceptions whatsoever. Now, in order to get there, you need to walk down the path of talking about the humanity of the child, their biological humanity specifically. Are preborn children members of the human family? And once you talk about that, sometimes you have to deepen the conversation about whether or not preborn children are persons, whether they have the same value that you and I do. Sure, they're members of the human family biologically, but are they persons, right? Now, often, that's the crux of the issue. That's where we want the conversation to go, but that's not often where the conversation starts. Where the conversation often starts is with pro-lifers and pro-choicers being focused on two different things, right? There's a gap in our focus. So you often have pro-choicers who are really focused exclusively on the mother, on her well-being, on her situation, her circumstances, her freedom, right? And then you have pro-lifers, on the other hand, who are, you know, we see the mother and we see those same concerns, or at least we should, right? Sometimes we don't express that very well, and it can kind of come off callous, right? But we also see a second person in this equation. And we have a broader focus that includes two people. And so if we're going to have a productive conversation, we need to bridge that gap. We need to meet that person where they're at and walk them towards a conversation about the humanity of the child. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking past each other, focused on two different things, and that's just going to be really frustrating, isn't it, when you just talk past each other? So bridging the gap, that's the first thing. And then from there, you then can talk about the crux of the issue. Who are preborn children, and what does abortion do to them? And that is the crux of the issue, because if abortion kills the living human being, then no abortions are justifiable. But if abortion does not kill a living human being, then it's not the human rights violation that pro-lifers make it out to be. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's why it's so important to get there, but the conversation often doesn't start there. It starts with this gap in focus. And if you use that roadmap that I just outlined, And if you commit to having more and more conversations and learning from those conversations, you will see results in your conversations. Okay? You will see, with experience, about a quarter of people becoming completely pro-life. This is a sample of over 8,000 conversations from our staff, our interns, and our volunteers when they're out on the streets talking with people about abortion. About 25% of people who, maybe they had one or two exceptions. Maybe they didn't know what they thought about abortion, or maybe they were a full pro-choice person right up until birth. 25% of them becoming pro-life without exceptions, saying abortion should never be allowed, right? That's the goal. Another 25% who support fewer and fewer abortions. Maybe they support it only earlier and earlier in pregnancy, or only in the harder and harder circumstances, like rape and life of the mother. And even the 50% where you don't notice a noticeable change, that many of those are still worthwhile conversations to have, because we can see that we're leaving a pebble in someone's shoe. Maybe they're saying things like, I never thought about it like that before, but I need to think about it more. Or, you made a few good points, but I want to go and do my research, right? Or, just thank you for this conversation. It was a lot better than I thought it was going to be, right? Like, a lot of people in that big category, 50%, are saying things like that. And so, these are the results that you can get with practice, with experience, with following the roadmap and the tools that I'm going to go through, which are just a brief overview of what we can cover in a longer program. So going back to bridging the gap here, I've got 3 tools up on the screen that we're going to use to bridge the gap. We're going to use that to meet someone where they're focused on a different circumstance, and then we're going to walk them towards a conversation about the humanity of the child, the crux of the issue. The first one is common ground. And by common ground, I just mean pointing out something that you agree with someone on. Why do you think that might be important to do in a conversation about abortion? Yeah? Can you say that one more time? Yeah, it shows that you're human, that you can empathize with that person. You understand kind of where they're coming from, right? Yeah. What might be another reason to find common ground with somebody? Takes them off the defensive? Yeah, I think so. It starts moving it towards a conversation, right? Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, common ground is really good for just bringing down the tension in a conversation, and it shows somebody that you're more like them, which I think, it breaks stereotypes about pro-lifers. It shows that, hey, we care about women. We care about the challenges of pregnancy, right? So I think that's really important to bring forward in the conversation. And so I use common ground all throughout my conversation. Anytime that person stops talking, the next thing that comes out of my mouth is almost me agreeing with something that they said. At least I don't want to agree to too much, but I agree with something that they've said. And that helps the conversation, builds a bridge. So that's what I would say about common ground. The analogy is the next tool up on the screen there. And analogies are very useful to use. We have a main analogy that we use in our conversations called trotting out the toddler. And what that is when someone gives you a reason that they say supports abortion, maybe it's a difficult circumstance, what I do is I repeat back that circumstance to them, but instead of a pregnant mother who's going through that circumstance, is a mother with a toddler who's going through that circumstance. And then would that circumstance justify killing the toddler? No, it would not. Well, then how could it justify killing the same child a couple of years earlier in the womb, right? So that's how I'm using that analogy to get them to think about abortion in a different way, right? And then lastly, questions. Why do you think it's good to ask lots of questions in your conversations? Anybody? Yeah. Yeah. Trying to narrow down, like, what are they getting at? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. You don't want to misrepresent kind of, yeah. Or not frustrate them by not getting kind of what they're trying to say. Yeah. Yeah, right? Right. Right. So maybe defining terms would be an example of that. Yeah. Like defining the words that you're using. Yeah. Yeah. And that happens all the time with abortion. That someone they haven't thought it through for themselves. It's kind of happening on the fly, right? And so they're using labels or slogans, and those are not precise, but also they don't accurately represent even what they think. Yeah, like, oh, I'm pro-choice. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, well, actually, just in the case of rape. Well, that's very different than like a full pro-choice position, right? So just asking them, okay, you're pro-choice. Do you have any limits on that, or do you think we should draw the line somewhere, or all abortion choices good? Yeah, that'd be an example of using questions to really not misrepresent the person, but actually find out what they think. So, yeah, questions. Questions are really good. Questions also keep the person engaged in the conversation, right? If I'm asking this person a question, they think, well, he's interested in what I have to say, so I'm going to stay in this conversation. This is actually a very good conversation to be having. So, yeah. So common ground, analogy, and question. In my conversations, I'm almost always doing one of these three things. Very rarely am I just telling somebody something that they should believe. Maybe if I have to give a bit of information about science or the law or something like that. But beyond that, I'm generally either pointing out common ground with something they just said, or I'm making an analogy, or I'm asking some questions. That's most of what I'm doing in a conversation. Yeah. I want to give you an example. We're going to go through a bunch of examples of circumstances, and I'm going to use these tools, common ground, analogy, question, to bridge that gap from where that person is focused about the mother and her situation, and walk them towards a conversation where we're talking about the humanity of the child. Okay, so I'm going to do it on the example of bodily autonomy first. So imagine, you ask somebody, hey, what do you think about abortion? And they say, well, I think it's a woman's choice. It's her body. She's the one who gets pregnant. And so she gets to decide whether she goes through with the pregnancy. It's her body, her choice. We've heard that before, right? Yeah. So I'm going to lead with common ground. And believe me, there is common ground. This is a tough one, but there is common ground on this one. So I'm going to say something like, I agree with you that choices are incredibly valuable, that bodily autonomy is important, it's a very high value, and that I'm glad that we live in a just society where people have a lot of freedom to make a lot of the choices that they want to make. I would not want to live in a country that took a lot of the choices that we make every day away from us. I would not want to live in a country like that. So I can see where you're coming from, right? So that's common ground. Just pointing out some legitimate common ground with somebody, something that you agree with, okay? And then I'm going to make an analogy. Imagine that you have a mom who was really excited about her pregnancy, And then she gave birth to her child, and she took this child through the infancy of that child, and it was a very colicky baby, right? Very hard to parent. And then as that child becomes a toddler, the issues are there, right? We're parents, right? We know that there's the terrible 2s and terrible 3s, right? I have toddlers. They're wonderful, but they keep me going. And now in that situation, right? Let's say she just regrets becoming a parent, right? The sleepless nights, and maybe this child is hard for her to handle, right? She doesn't know how to navigate that. Now, in that situation where she has parental regret, would we ever say it's okay for her to lash out or even to harm or kill her 2-year-old child? No, of course not, right? Now, at this point, I'm going to ask a question to bring it home, to pivot back to the humanity of the child. I agree with you. Now, if we can't, choose to use our body to kill a born child, a 2-year-old, because we don't want to be a parent anymore, how can we choose to kill the same child in the womb 2 years earlier in the same situation? Right? And you're kind of asking them to say, like, well, what's the difference between the two? Right? What's the difference between choosing, in the name of freedom and choice, choosing to kill the 2-year-old because you don't want to be responsible for them anymore, versus choosing to kill the same child 2 years earlier in the womb, right? That's kind of what you're trying to communicate there. And then at that point, they're going to say, well, that's very different, right? Because that's just a clump of cells, or that's just a fetus, right? They're not alive. They're not human. And, what you've noticed here, what are we not talking about at this point? We're not talking about choice, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about the humanity of the child and whether preborn children are equally human to born children, right? That's what has happened now in the conversation. And so that's a progression in the conversation. That's a good thing, okay? I'll give another example here. Let's say the mother's age here. So if I say, hey, what do you think about abortion? And you say to me, well, I think if a mother's in high school, if she's really young, she's not ready to be a parent. So she should have that option, right? What's going to be my first step? Common ground, right? Yeah. So I might say something like, I agree with you. It would be really difficult to be a teen and to have a teen pregnancy, right? There's a lot of overwhelming things going on in high school, and to add on top of that a child, to be pregnant and then have to care for that child, like that would be really difficult, right? So you want to empathize with that situation. So that's the common ground. I'll give you an analogy here. You could say to someone, imagine that you have a young girl, maybe she's 16, she goes through it, she gets pregnant, teen pregnancy. She has very supportive parents, though. And so she takes that child to term and begins raising that child with her parents. But then let's say her parents go through a nasty divorce, and that support that was there, that was really key, is now fallen away. And now she's really struggling to raise this child, going back and forth between her parents' houses, and her grades are slipping, and she's becoming depressed. In this situation, in this terrible situation, would we ever say it's okay for that teen mom to kill her born child because she could handle the situation anymore? No, they're going to say, right? Now, the question that I'm asking, right, is, I agree with you. She can't kill the born child. However, she can't kill a born child because she's a struggling teen mom. How can she choose to kill the same child earlier in the womb because she's a struggling teen mom? Right? And now again, they might say, well, that's different. That's just a fetus. They're not a living, breathing human, right? That's why we treat them differently. But again, now we're talking about the crux of the issue. We're not talking about, the difficulties of being pregnant in high school. We're talking about whether or not that preborn child is a human or not. And that's where the conversation needs to go. And we've gotten there in a very empathetic way, right? We didn't dismiss any concerns. Okay? So we've done the first two. Let's do poverty, and I'll try and walk you guys through it, but I'd like you guys to provide the next step of using the tools that I've given you, okay? So if someone says, I think if a mother is poor and she can't afford to have a child, so she should be able to get an abortion, what's the first step you want to do? Sorry? Establish common ground. Perfect. Do you want to give an attempt at that? Yeah. So just if you're up for it, just say the common ground as if I was the person you were talking to. Yeah, totally. So let's say she says, if a mother can't afford to look after a child, to have another child, she should be able to make that choice. Yeah, good common ground. What would be the next step? Sorry? An analogy. Did you want to take a stab at it? Do you want to give the analogy? Just as if you were talking to the person. Is he doing call a friend? Sorry? Yes. How might you just do that even in a very simple way? No, of course not. That would be terrible. Yeah. So that was a very good analogy, I thought. Yeah. Yeah, that would be very good. Awesome. Now, how do you bring it home? What's the next part, the next tool that we need to use? Because they'll be like, okay, but so what? We're not talking about a toddler. What's your point, right? How might you bring it home so that you can start talking about the humanity using a question? Ask a question. There you go. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah. Sorry. Just to shake it up? Yeah. Yeah, that could work. I mean, yeah, anybody born, really, right? Yeah, so yeah, if we would not kill a born child because the mother's poor, why would we kill a preborn child? Because the mother's poor, right? So let's do another one, and then I'll do the last two because there's a little bit more to them. So if someone says to you, hey, like if a child's just going to go into the system, the foster care system, where they're going to be passed around from family to family, possibly, likely, get abused, neglected. What kind of life is that for a child? Wouldn't it be better if they just had an abortion? Right? What would be the first step you want to do? Common ground? Awesome. Perfect. No, that's really good. Who would like to make an analogy that you could follow that up with? Maybe somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Yeah. I'll come back to you if nobody else wants to. Yeah. He didn't put his hand up. Nothing happened over there. Right. Yeah, foster care is not a death sentence, right? Yeah. Yeah. I think that is something helpful to point out at some point in the conversation. But what I would try to do is show them that it doesn't really matter what the outcome in foster care is. That killing is not the answer to an imperfect system, right? I mean, even if you knew that that child was going to have a rough go in foster care, we wouldn't suggest that abortion is okay, right? And so I want to attack the premise. I want to deal with the underlying argument. Sometimes that can be helpful to kind of add in later, just to kind of give them something else to think about. But I really want to go for the principle at hand here, which is we don't kill people to solve problems. We don't kill born people to solve problems. We don't kill preborn people to solve problems, right? Especially if they're both people, right? So that's why I'd want to make an analogy. Do you want to try an analogy on foster care? Yeah, of course not, right? Yeah, and then how might you finish that up with a question? Yeah. Yeah, if we want to kill a child who's already suffering in the foster care system, why kill the same child earlier, because they only may suffer, right? Yeah. No, that's really good, really good. The next two are ones that come up quite often. These all come up quite often. Now, one thing I want to note is that the more serious the circumstance, I think the more we should try to really connect with our common ground. Okay? I think that is a very prudent thing to do in the conversation. And so when it comes to sexual assault, I try to build common ground at least in 3 different ways. I'm going to say something about just how awful sexual assault is, and that happens too much. I'm going to say something about how we need to help the victims, and then something about justice for the perpetrator. Like, I'm going to try and do those 3 things. If you forget one of those, that's fine, but I think it's really important to try and build common ground there, because as I think it was Stephanie Gray once said that if when someone's asking about sexual assault, it's not often that they're asking whether the baby is human. They're asking, are you human, right? Like, do you care about victims, right? Or are you just here on a pedestal, right? So really important that we build that connection. And so I'm going to say something like, you and I, we could agree that sexual assault is probably one of the worst things that could happen to somebody, right? And that happens far too often. We need to do a lot more to stop it. Build a culture where that is something that just doesn't happen, right? And, for those who have already been violated in that way, that, we should do better to offer them resources, to help them get back on their feet, right? And then for the perpetrators, we should be punishing them to the fullest extent of the law, and in a much stricter way than they already do. Very few people get actually convicted of sexual assault, and it seems like they get a slap on the wrist, right? Quite often. So that's kind of the common ground that I'm going to try and build with that person. And then I'm going to make an analogy. So an analogy I like to use, there's different ones you can use. One that I like to use is saying, well, imagine you have a happily married couple, and they want to have a baby, so they have intercourse one day. But then a week later, the wife is violently raped by a stranger. And so in the coming weeks, she finds out that she's pregnant, and she's hoping that the father is her husband, right? And so she takes that baby to term, and after the baby's born, she finds out, the baby doesn't really look like my husband, and so she takes a paternity test and finds out, no, the baby's father is not the husband who loves me, but is the rapist, right? And now I can only imagine what she might be going through, right? She might not want to see that child. The child might remind her of the darkest night of her life, right? It might look like the perpetrator. She might not want to even be near that child. She might even want to lash out at that child, right? But in that situation, would we ever say it's okay for her to kill her newborn child as a way of coping with the trauma of sexual assault? No, right? Like anything but that, right? And so if you can't kill a born child to cope with sexual assault, how can we kill a preborn child to cope with sexual assault, right? And then the last one here, life of the mother. This one is similar to the other ones, but there's a step that's added. We're going to find common ground, and then we're going to add a definition. What do we mean by abortion? Because that is very important when you're talking about life of the mother. Medical procedures that can harm the child and harm the mother. It's really important that you define what you mean by abortion, or help the mother but harm the child is what I mean. So when someone says, if a mother's life is in danger, she should be able to get an abortion, I'm going to say something like, I'm going to start with common ground. I think women deserve the best medical care that our system can give them. And I can't imagine what it would feel like to be, excited about a pregnancy and then find that that you just get the news, a prognosis that your life is in danger, that it may come down to you or the child. I can't imagine what that would feel like. What I mean by abortion is a procedure that directly, intentionally kills a preborn child. I don't mean a life-saving medical treatment to help the mother that might unintentionally and indirectly but foreseeably harm the child. Chemotherapy would be an example of that. If a mother, is pregnant and she gets a cancer diagnosis and she's really early in pregnancy, and the medical team is saying that you really need to start now your medical treatment. You can't wait for that child to get older to deliver that child. Then I think it's up to the mother. That's a conversation she needs to have. It's a choice she can make because there's proportionality there. And it's important that we distinguish between a heroic choice and what's the minimally ethical choice, right? Because you hear stories of Saint Gianna Molla, right, who just sacrificed herself for a child, and I think that's very heroic. But what we're talking about is what's the minimum ethical bar that people need to jump over, and the minimum standard is that they don't directly and intentionally kill their child, right? Yes. So once you define what you mean by abortion, direct intentional killing versus a medical procedure that has an unintended side effect that might harm the child. Once you make that distinction, a lot of people, they can see the reasonability of that, and that often clears that objection away. Now, if somebody is thinking, well, no, it doesn't really matter what we're talking about here, direct abortion, I think that's okay to save a mother's life. If that's where the person comes down, then I think you need to move to an analogy and then to that question. And so what I would do in that situation is I would say, imagine you have a mother with a toddler, and that toddler has a highly contagious illness. And in that situation, it's very deadly. Would we ever say it's okay for that mom to put that child in the basement and not feed that child, not care for that child, to save her own life? Or would we say, no, she needs to do something to care for that child, even if it puts her life at risk? Right? Never mind would we say, could she just shoot that child so that the child didn't breathe on her and get her sick, right? No. So if you can't kill a born child because they might be a threat to your life, how can you directly kill a preborn child in the same situation? Does that make sense? Yeah? I know that can go a lot deeper, like medical ethics could be its own talk, but I think those are some helpful ways to begin talking about it. Yeah. Awesome. So, yeah, go for it. Oh, go for it. You're already starting off very, very friendly, so yeah, no. Yeah. Yeah, so if it's if the pregnancy is like an aggravating factor to an underlying medical condition like cancer, right? Then that's one thing. I think there's going to be a tendency to try and maintain the pregnancy as long as you can, even if you're giving the treatment. If the pregnancy itself, though, is kind of the cause, right? Like an ectopic pregnancy, a tubal ectopic pregnancy. If that's, you can't continue the pregnancy, right? In that situation, you can end that pregnancy without directly and intentionally killing that child, even if you know that removing that child from the mother's body in an intact manner, without committing violence to them. Even if you know that that is going to result in the child dying, they were going to die anyways. You're saving one instead of none, right? So in an ectopic pregnancy, a tubal ectopic pregnancy where the child is implanted in the fallopian tube, the most morally safe way to remove that child would be to cut on both sides of that fallopian tube. It's called a salpingectomy. That's the name of the procedure, and then remove the child that way. And they weren't going to live anyways. Quite often, they're already dead when the pregnancy is discovered to be there. But yeah, and that would be very different than doing a salpingostomy, which is a different procedure that slices open the fallopian tube and then just scrapes out that child. That's like a dilation and curettage abortion. It's really no different, right? Yeah. Does that make sense as an example? Like, it's sometimes okay to end the pregnancy, but it's never okay to target the child's body, right? Yeah. But you still need a really good reason to end the pregnancy, in a way that puts the child's life at risk. You can't just end a pre-viable pregnancy without any proportional reason, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So all of those, like all of those circumstances that we talked about, right? Poverty, foster care, sexual assault, life of the mother. There could be 100 other circumstances up on that PowerPoint slide that someone might bring up. But you can use the same 3 tools to talk about abortion. You find common ground. You make an analogy using the same situation, where it's a mother with a born child instead of a pregnant mother. And then you ask, if you can't kill the born child in that situation, how can you kill a preborn child? And you're really just getting at this principle that we don't kill people to solve problems, regardless of the problem or the circumstance. So if we won't kill a born person to solve a problem, how can we kill a preborn child to solve a problem? Now, they might say, oh, but they're not human, right? But hey, like I mentioned, we're at the crux of the issue. Now, what do you do when you get there? That's what we're going to cover right now. So when we bridge that gap, we get to that humanity part of the roadmap, that's where I like to use what we call the human rights argument. And the human rights argument is just 4 questions. I recommend that you memorize them in some way. Very powerful questions that do a lot of heavy lifting in the conversation. And I'll just go through them right now. So the first one is, do you believe all humans should get human rights? Yeah, of course. I mean, who doesn't, right? Very few people disagree with that. Now, if something is growing, isn't it alive? At least biologically alive, right? Yes. I know icicles grow, but like they construct themselves. They get constructed by outside forces, right? They don't develop themselves in an internally directed way. That's what the kind of growth that I'm talking about. Growing from 1 cell to 2 to 4 and beyond. And then if that living thing has human parents, isn't he or she a living human too? Right? They're not a cat or a dog or anything else. Isn't this a living human that we're talking about? And then, well, if humans get human rights and abortion kills a living human, wouldn't that make abortion a human rights violation? Okay? So these are the questions that I would ask. I ask them in every conversation. Sometimes I ask them a couple times. They do a lot of heavy lifting in the conversation. And that's because they do something for you. One is they frame abortion as a human rights issue. So it's not exclusively a religious issue, even though human rights are grounded in the fact that we're made in God's image, right? But everyone believes in human rights, and so they're very useful. It's good common ground to work from. And also, they show that abortion is not merely a medical choice between a mother and her doctor. It's something everybody ought to care about, and everyone ought to have a say in. So when you frame it as a human rights issue, it does a lot of good for your conversation. Right? It's hard to talk about choice, as if it's just a choice for a preference. Ice cream, is it vanilla or is it chocolate, when you're talking about a human rights issue, right? Some people will bring up as an objection, okay, that's fine, but we don't know when human life begins, right? And what I would say is, well, who are the experts on this matter? And if we don't know, who should we go to for an answer? And if you're doing outreach with us, you can, we'll have pamphlets that have a biology textbook quote on them about when human life begins. But even if someone doesn't like that, you can just ask them, well, hey, pull out your phone. And do you have data? We can look it up together, right? And just search, when does human life begin? And go to the results that come from embryology textbooks, the quotes from biology textbooks. And they're going to back you up on this, because there's an incredibly strong consensus in the scientific community about when human life begins. That when sperm and egg come together, that forms a unique living human individual, a member of the human species, the human zygote, which is the youngest of human embryos. And that's what I would use in your conversation. You can just go online. So homework for after tonight is to Google, when does human life begin, and just familiarize yourself with the search results that show up on your phone, so that you're not, sifting through that when you actually have a conversation about it. Okay, sound good? Awesome. Now, you've talked about the humanity of the child at this point, and you get agreement from them. You need to, get that agreement that, okay, they are living members of the human family. They are Homo sapiens, just like you and I. But, they might say, but they're not a person, right? And so now you have to dive a little bit deeper into the personhood of that child, whether they're valuable like you and I, whether they get human rights like you and I. Now, what they're often going to do at this point is they're going to bring up a difference that exists between preborn children and born humans, right? They're going to point to some difference, some attribute that preborn children don't have, that born people have, and they're going to say, you need to have that to get human rights. And because preborn children don't have that, they don't get human rights. They're not people. They're not persons. Okay? So that's what's happening in this part of the conversation. They might say, well, a preborn child, a fetus, is not self-aware. They can't think like you and I. They don't know that they exist, right? So they don't get human rights. Or they might say they're very dependent on their mother's body to live. You and I are not. They don't get human rights. They might say they can't feel pain. They can't sense the outside world. They're not sentient, so they don't get human rights. Right? They might say, well, they're not born yet, right? They're still inside their mother's womb. You know, rights and personhood begin with birth, right? Or they just might even point out the sheer smallness of the child, saying, like, how can something that is as small as a dot on the end of the sentence, how can that get the same rights that you and I have? Right? So this is something that we then need to respond to. Now, I would not contest any of this, right? Especially early in pregnancy, for the first trimester where 90% of abortions happen, all of these differences exist. The preborn child is very tiny. They cannot live outside their mother's body. They can't feel pain. They definitely don't have a sense of the self, right? So don't spend any time debating whether those differences exist. They do. And so find common ground there. Yeah, I agree with you. That is true. And yet, what I want you to do is I want you to ask why the difference exists. Why does a preborn child, why can they not feel pain, right? Why are they not self-aware? Why are they so small, right? So ask them why, and it's going to come down to the fact that the child is so young, because all of those differences are functions of age, the age of the child. And what this shows in the worldview of someone who's pro-choice is that they often have a different view of who gets human rights. For pro-lifers, it's, hey, if you're human, you count. You get human rights, right? You don't got to jump through hoops. You don't have to perform special feats, right? You don't have to be able-bodied. If you're human, you get human rights, right? That's our belief. But that's not the belief of some people. For some people, you need to be human plus a certain attribute to get human rights, right? And in the case of abortion, it's you need to be human plus a certain age. Human plus the age of consciousness, right? Or human plus the age of being a certain size, or having a heartbeat, or whatever it is, right? Or being born to get human rights. Now, what I would do when someone brings this up, I'm going to start by asking why, then I'm going to try and get them to see that, hey, their position is actually that you need to be human plus an age to get human rights. And then I'm going to compare that to other examples throughout history where the same kind of thinking, the same formula for discrimination was being used. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. So if someone says to me, Kyle, I think you need to be able to feel pain to get human rights, and the embryo just can't do that. So that's why I believe abortion is okay. Then I'm going to say, okay, like I agree with you, they can't feel pain, especially that early in pregnancy. Now, why is that? And, they might be a little flustered, right? They might be like, well, what do you mean why? Like, they just can't, obviously. Look at them, right? And then I'm going to be like, well, okay, yeah, but like it's because they haven't had the time, right? They haven't developed the ability to feel pain. And if they had more time, then they would develop that ability, right? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And so isn't time and development then reflected in our age? Like as time goes on, as we develop, we will develop those features, like the ability to feel pain? Yeah, that makes sense to me. So would it be fair to say that what we're talking about here is the view that you need to be human plus a certain age, in your case, the age of being able to feel pain, to get human rights. Is that fair to say? Yes. Okay, so human plus a certain age to get human rights. And I've gotten him to agree with that. Okay. Well, then I can say, this way of thinking about human rights is not new. It's been thought about that way on other human rights issues in the past and present. Today, we're applying it to abortion. But in the past, people thought you need to be human plus a certain gender to get human rights. And we'd agree that sexism is awful, right? Yeah, of course it is. Right, and so in other areas, people thought you need to be human plus a certain skin color to get human rights. And of course, I'd ask them, you agree racism is pretty terrible, right? Yeah. Now, help me to understand. If it's okay to say you need to be human plus a certain age to get human rights, how is that any different than saying you need to be human plus a certain gender to get human rights? Or human plus a certain skin color or race to get human rights? How's that any different? And, they might just kind of be like, well, what do you mean? It's very different. Well, how is it different, right? So in the other cases, you have, you're human plus a certain skin color. The humanness, we base the human rights in that, right? Because that's the primary characteristic about somebody. And skin color is a very secondary thing, right? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And with gender, being human is what's important. It's what's primary. And your gender, it's important, but it's secondary. And we don't base human rights on that, right? Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now when we come back to the age here, being human is the primary thing. Isn't how old you are very secondary? Yes, so that's how they're the same. So what's the difference between doing those, between discriminating in those ways? Right, so that's what I would ask them. Sorry, you had a question? Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, for sure, 20 weeks. But I think there's some research showing even like as early as 12 weeks. Yeah. Yeah. But kind of my point is so I think that's important to bring up, especially if you can't get anywhere with them, and so you're just going to try and get somewhere on late-term abortion with them. I think bringing up humanizing features like that is really impactful. But in a conversation, I'm trying to go all the way. I'm trying to get them all the way to my side, and so I want to get them to even agree with me that killing a preborn child who can't feel pain is just as wrong as killing them later. So that's why I don't lead with that approach, but I think that could be helpful, 20, 30 minutes into a conversation where you're not getting everything you want. How do you get something when you can't get everything, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions on what I just said? Yeah? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot of ignorance in there. A lot. So, you have to start giving a course in reproductive biology, which is a sad thing to do, but you have no choice,
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes using short video can be really good if someone just doesn't have any idea about prenatal development. A short 2-minute video can really be impactful. But asking those questions, like, okay, just think through it with me. If something's growing, isn't it alive? That's the power of those questions, is that they're very intuitive. There's only one right answer to them, right? Yeah. So that's why you can reason with somebody who doesn't have a lot of knowledge just by asking these very intuitive questions that you're just asking them to have common sense, kind of a common sense position on abortion, not a specialist's position on abortion, right? Yeah. That's good, but we can keep talking about that in the Q&A if you have more follow-up on that. So this is the conversational roadmap as I've presented it. So I'll just briefly recap it. We want to get someone to the end of the roadmap where they are fully pro-life, without exception. We have to talk about the humanity of the child in order to get there, because that is the crux of the issue, whether preborn children are human beings who are being killed by abortion. But often the conversation doesn't start there, right? It starts with pro-lifers and pro-choicers often focused on different things. So using common ground, an analogy to a born child in the same situation, and then a question. If not a born child, why a preborn child? That brings the conversation back to the humanity of the child. Then you use the human rights argument. Should all humans get human rights? If something's growing, isn't it alive? If that living thing has human parents, doesn't that make them a living human? If abortion kills a living human, doesn't that make abortion a human rights violation? And then if someone wants to talk about personhood, then framing abortion as being about age-based discrimination and showing that they have a different view of human rights, that they think being human is not enough, that you need to be human plus something else, a certain age, to get human rights. And how is that really any different than what's gone on in the past? So that is the roadmap. And at this point, I want to kind of pivot a little bit to talking a bit about, I had mentioned in the parish email that in my presentations, I share about the victims of abortion. And, that is really important to do that, I find. First of all, because I've been personally impacted by them. I grew up in a pro-life home, and we went to the once or twice a day marches. Once or twice a year marches. It's getting late, isn't it? Yeah, we're in this together. Once or twice a year marches. And, my parents were very pro-life, grew up in a Catholic home, and yet I didn't really care about the issue that much. I didn't think about it too much. It just wasn't, it wasn't in my social media feed. It wasn't in the conversations of my friends. And so it was out of sight, out of mind. Well, one day I was in college doing an ethics paper on abortion, and not because I cared about the issue, but because I knew what I thought about the issue. And so I thought it was going to be an easy paper to do, right? We've all made those kind of choices before, right? If you've been in university. And, but in my research for that paper, I came face to face with the victims. I saw a video of an abortion, and it really changed the way I thought about the issue. I couldn't unsee what I had seen, and I couldn't forget about what was going on every day in this country. And I think that helped me be a better person, and so helped me respond to the crisis of abortion in a way that was more full. And it's, because words just can't adequately describe what an abortion is. Sometimes you just have to see it to believe it, to know that it's happening. And, what we do in our country, we're in a church here, to use a bit more Christian imagery, what we do in our country is a very Herod-like thing, right? Going after the most innocent. And, it's something that we as Christians really need to grapple with and to respond to. So I'm going to share this video, and I'm going to watch it with you. It's 3 minutes. It's a little bit different than the one I said. I couldn't get that one into my PowerPoint. So it shows you a bit about the history of abortion in Canada, and then it shows you the broken bodies of these victims. Lately I've kind of come to think, after seeing this video, and I watch it from time to time in my work, not too much so that I get depressed, but enough to push me onwards in this fight. And I come to think, when we look at the situation in Canada, where are the children, right? We, every child should have a home, a safe home in his mother's womb, right? The safest place for that child to be. And, a home to be nurtured, a home to be loved, a home to be safe, and that's denied of children in our country, or we think of the child Jesus, right? Safe in his mother's womb, safe in her arms, safe in the manger, and even as a victim like these children, in her arms after being taken down from the cross. But, in our country, children end up in dumpsters. We have children in toilets, children in furnaces. That's where children go in our country when they're unwanted. They go to those places. I wish those places were metaphors, but those are the very real, very awful places that Canadian children go. And it's good to grieve them. I think every child who dies, whether it's by abortion or miscarriage, should be grieved. But they don't need our tears, right? They need our action. That's what they need most from us. They need our action. They need our resolve to do something day in and day out that makes Canada a safer place for the least among us. And I want to share with you guys a couple opportunities. Maybe some of these are geared towards high school students, and maybe someone who's between jobs or in university. And so keep that in mind. But you may have, a grandchild, or someone related to you, or someone that you know on your street who may be interested in something like this. And so keep that in mind. The first thing is let me make sure my clicker's working. So the first thing is the Winnipeg Pro-Life Boot Camp. This is a camp that runs from March 31st to April 3rd. It's for grade 10 and up. So if you're a teenager who's in grade 10 and up, this is the boot camp for you to go to. It's 4 days of training. You get way more training than what we've covered today. And then you get to take that training. You get about 5 hours of training a day. You get to take that onto a university campus, working side by side with other youth who attend the camp and with CCBR staff to have conversations with people about abortion, holding our signs, talking with them. And then at the end of each day, we have a lot of fun and games in the school gym. And then there's a hotel, there's a pool. It is an awesome experience. The first year we ran it in 2023, we had 23 people. And then we had 27 people the next year come. And so I'm hoping for something similar this year. We've got about 15 people registered for it. And that's on pace to get to that number of about 25 to 30 youth coming to this camp for 4 days to really get the skills that they need to change hearts and minds, to make a difference, whether it's with their high school peers, whether it's when they go to university later, or when they enter the workforce. These are incredible skills to have, and you get to spend a week getting to know other people of similar values, forming friendships that last, and making a difference for the babies on a university campus, which is ground zero for the abortion debate, the abortion conversation. That's where the most abortion vulnerable people are, is on a university campus. So an amazing week, and the deadline is March 1st to apply. I'll put that up later. And then the second opportunity is a paid summer job here in Winnipeg that runs July and August through our summer internship program. This is a position where we spend about 30 hours a week out of the office doing CCBR's projects, out on the streets, talking with people about abortion, and about 10 hours a week in the office for training and furthering our mission at CCBR. Now, to put a little bit of, to let you know a little bit more about this, seeing is believing, I'm going to play a video that highlights our summer internship program. And there's something in there also about that you can pull out of there to think about how the boot camp would be a similar experience as well.
Abortion happens 300 times a day in Canada. There's no one to protect these babies.
They're voiceless, and if you can recognize that, recognize the need to do something about it.
It takes a leap of courage, but once you do it, you get to see minds change right in front of you.
Every summer, the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform responds with our paid internships in Toronto and Calgary.
I wanted to get involved with the pro-life movement, and I saw that the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform was the most effective changing hearts and minds.
Hi there, what do you think about abortion?
Every day of CCBR's internships, young people go out into the street to communicate with members of the Canadian public.
Do you believe in human rights?
To change their minds, change their hearts, and save the lives of these children.
You will challenge the status quo of our nation using CCBR's outreach projects such as postcarding, door knocking, and conversational street outreach.
You'll get equipped with apologetics, strategy, tools to engage the culture and make a change in our country.
Is it okay, not okay? I was just talking to 3 guys on the street, and we walked through how all human beings should get human rights. And by the end of the conversation, all 3 of them agreed that abortion was never okay.
You will grow in skills and character, gaining friendships and community.
There's a lot of things that make this experience worth it. It's the relationships and the friendships you get to make through it all.
You'll learn public speaking, you'll learn leadership skills.
Who do you think should get human rights?
We use abortion victim photography and effective and compassionate apologetics.
I've learned about why abortion victim photography is so effective. I've learned how to defend the pro-life position.
Our projects reach Canadians with the truth about abortion, and our polling data shows that 67% of these people think more negatively about abortion. You will see countless people change their minds on abortion, and you will see lives saved.
It's been a pretty intense summer in a really good way. I learned how to communicate with literally everyone.
I think that all humans should get human rights.
Whether you're outgoing or this is a step outside your comfort zone, we need all kinds of people.
Make abortion unthinkable in Canada.
Be a defender of preborn children alongside us this summer.
Apply today at endtokilling.ca/internship. Space is limited.
So we have been running internship programs at CCBR for well over a decade now, out in Calgary and out in Toronto. But last year was the first year that we ran one here in Winnipeg. We had 5 interns work with Josh and I actually for 2 months, doing amazing things, having hundreds of conversations out on the street, showing abortion victim photography to tens of thousands of people. And it included a 2-week trip out to Calgary to get training in our head office before coming out and spending the last 6 weeks here changing hearts and minds. Again, I said about 30 hours a week out on the street and about 10 hours a week in the office for training. And over that time, yeah, we saw over 100 people become fully pro-life. So it was just a really amazing thing. These are 10 to 50-minute conversations that we're having with people. And we know that from the statistical evidence that we gathered that tens of thousands of more people were feeling more pro-life by the end of the summer than they were at the beginning. So that's the impact of a single internship. And this year we want to grow that to 10 interns. So there's a lot of room right now to join the internship team. So pass that message along. We're really excited about it. So these are the deadlines for the boot camp. It is March 1st to apply, and for the internship, giving people a little bit of time after the boot camp to apply as well. But if you're considering applying to the internship, I wouldn't wait because there's spots now, but there might not be spots come the middle of April. Yeah, so that's something to consider. Now, if someone is not able to intern or doesn't know anyone who can intern or go to boot camp, there are other ways to get involved in our work. First, as a volunteer, getting more training than what I've just offered here today. Josh would be the person who works with you and helps get you comfortable volunteering. He'll take you through a one-on-one workshop, which is about 90 minutes. He'll take you going door to door in a residential area of, I think probably Steinbach is the closest place here that we would go, and have that conversation at the doorstep where he would, he would show you how to have the conversation, he would model it for you, and then slowly get you to take over parts of that conversation as you were more comfortable, and then giving you feedback to the point where you become very comfortable and independent as someone who is having the conversation, growing in that wisdom that I talked about. So volunteering is very needed. It's very meaningful, whether it's once a month or once a week. We would much appreciate anyone who would like to volunteer with our outreach year-round. That goes year-round in the fair weather days anyways. Yeah, Ryan? Internship is same as boot camp. It's going to be the same. It is a bit longer, right? And so, I think, if someone's a fairly mature 16-year-old, I think it could be a good fit. Oh, there we go. Yeah. And then the other thing that you'd have to navigate is the commute, right? So we'll be basing our internship out of a church kind of in the center south of the city. And so some people, if they're from too far out, they might find a relative to spend the summer with. And if that's the case, if someone's first time from home, but if they're just commuting in every day, it's about 8 to 5, roughly. We're still working on that right now, yeah. But it is about an 8 to 5, Monday to Friday position, yeah. Okay, awesome. And then the last way to get involved is to financially partner with the work. This is full-time work for Josh and myself, and running the internship does cost money. It costs about $2,500 an intern just in overhead to run the vehicles, to have the signs, to hand out the pamphlets. We hand out hundreds of pamphlets every day. And so for every intern, that's kind of the annual cost as well. And then obviously there's the vehicle as well that we'll be driving. We have one vehicle right now that we drove around all summer last year, and we're going to be getting another vehicle as well so that we can double the size of our internship. So that is really exciting. But those are some of the things that we're working towards. And so there are donor packages that Josh has handed out. I ask you to prayerfully consider financially partnering with our work so that we can scale up and reach more and more people with the truth about abortion. Awesome. At this point, I'd like to just turn it over to any questions that people might have. Yes, the boot camp. So the early bird is over, so it's $225. Now that covers 3 evenings in a hotel. It covers all the food throughout the boot camp for the student, and all the travel from the school to the hotel to the campus and back every day. So it is quite a steal. Our donors subsidize the boot camp quite heavily so that we could make it available to as many kids as we can. A lot of families that sign up for boot camp, they might be a single income family. They might have 5 kids, 8 kids, and so we want to make this really accessible to everybody. It's 4 days. So the red is the deadline. It's March 1st, but it's March 31st to April 1st. That's how long the boot camp runs. Or April 3rd, sorry. Or April. Oh, shoot. That's a typo. That's a typo. Okay. March 31st to April 3rd. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, those are good questions. So just in case anyone didn't hear them, the first question was when the circumstance kind of focuses in on the suffering of the child, how would I address that instead of the welfare of the mother, let's say? That was the first question. And then the second one was, with MAID, medical assistance in dying, or euthanasia-assisted suicide becoming prevalent, how is that impacting trotting out the toddler, as an example? I think that's probably what you're talking about. So the first one is I would go through the exact same flow of argument. And so your common ground is, like, let's say they give an example of a child who, they're diagnosed with a disability in the womb, right? Or maybe even a terminal condition, right? They're diagnosed with a terminal condition. Wouldn't it better, rather than putting mom and dad through that and the medical team and that child, why not just kind of have the abortion, right? Early on, instead of going through all of that, which involves suffering for everybody, right? But especially for the child. So in that situation, I'm going to say, like, I agree. I don't want anyone to suffer. I wouldn't want that upon anybody, right? And especially, if you were really looking forward to that pregnancy, that was a wanted child, right? But then to get this terrible news that they're going to suffer a lot for what short of a life that they're going to have, right? Now, I'm still going to trot out the toddler. I'm going to say, well, hey, let's say you didn't get diagnosed in the womb, but they missed it, or the disease manifested later when the child was 2 years old after they're born. They're still going to suffer in the same way. They're still going to be that concerned. But in that situation, would we ever say that you could just kill that toddler because they got a diagnosis of a terminal condition? Yeah, well, or because they're going to suffer, right? So I would trot out the toddler. Maybe they missed the diagnosis in the womb, and they found out after birth, or the disease came about later. So that's how I typically handle a medical issue like that. But foster care was an example. Yeah. And so would we kill the toddler who has, he's in a poor family or he's in foster care and he's going to suffer? Would we kill them as a solution? No, we wouldn't. So then why earlier in pregnancy? So whether they're focused on the mother or if they're trying to make a compassion argument for the child, you can do the same thing with that. Now, in the case of euthanasia, it does come up every once in a while. There is somebody who says, but yeah, maybe we could, if that toddler was going to die anyways, they had a terminal condition, maybe that would be the most compassionate thing to do is to end their life, right? I've heard people say that. It's a minority of people, a small number of people. Is it growing? Yeah, I'd say it's probably growing as a number of people that would say that. And so from there, if that comes up, often I'm trying to go what you might call a heart route, where I think, okay, there's something happened for this person. Maybe they had a late-term abortion or something really late, or they were in a bad situation, or maybe they had a toddler or their brother or their sister had a toddler who, had a very, very painful medical journey, and then ended up dying. Like, there could be something there personal for that person. And if so, then I think you need to kind of get off what we call head apologetics, which is this, and kind of speak a bit more to the heart for that person. And that, that's a bit too much to cover tonight, but on something like the boot camp, we cover that on like day 2 or 3, right? We'll spend 2 hours talking about how do you talk to someone who's post-abortive? How do you talk to someone who's experienced tremendous suffering? I had someone that I talked to a little while back who him and his sister grew up in the foster care system, right? And she became suicidal because of the abuse that they both went under. And then he used that informed his experience about abortion. So he thought abortion was okay in the situation of foster care. It wasn't a rational thing. It was a very personal thing, right? And I think when people start justifying infanticide, I think often there's something going on underneath the mask, so to speak, of what you're seeing. Yeah. The other alternative is just to go into euthanasia apologetics, which again would be, a different thing to do, in that conversation. Sorry? Yeah, that's a good one. I'll say I haven't had a lot of experience with that. All my colleagues are pro-life, but I would say, it might depend a bit on a couple things, right? Like, what is the relationship you have to that colleague, and how did it end? Did it end like pretty amicably, where it's like, you were just not getting anywhere, but like, so maybe we won't talk about this anymore? Or did it end kind of like you were almost throwing at each other? So that might determine a bit how you bring it back up. And if it was more of an amicable disagreement, then I would just maybe say something like, hey, I've thought a little bit more about what you had said there, when we kind of reached an impasse. I thought a little bit more about that, and, here's what I think about it now. That would be one way to do it, I think. Because it shows that you're thinking about something that they've said, that something that they said kind of stuck with you. Rather than just bringing it in randomly at some other point in the conversation. I think someone could respect that, Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So she said she didn't want to talk about it when you had mentioned something. When you started. Oh, okay. So it didn't go on very long. No. I think people often might do that because they don't have hope for the conversation, right? Or it's very personal to them. So I think building a bridge with that person, not necessarily on the abortion issue, but just friendship. Yeah. Yeah. The thing, yeah. Yeah, that is tough. Yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah. In that situation, I mean, just asking a question. Were you asking a question she said she didn't want to talk about, or did you kind of just say something? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe one way to talk about it would be to lead with some questions, or even just to talk about something related to the issue, but something where there'd be a lot more common ground. That might be one way to do it. So something like, isn't it sad that so many people who, they don't want abortions, right? But they end up having to have them. They're not having as many kids as they'd like to have. Wouldn't it be nice if, there was something we could do to help people have the kids they want to have, right? Or support moms who are in challenging pregnancies. And just try and kind of build that common ground around care for mothers and fathers, support for them who are in challenging situations. And yeah, because it's true that people end up having unwanted abortions. Yeah, or that they're coerced into abortions. Yeah. So maybe exploring that a little bit could be helpful. There should be a lot of common ground there. Yeah. 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 Oh, glad it's helpful. Yeah. Yeah, Father Kevin? Yeah.
So I think if you ask the question, who pays the price
Yeah.
for the abortion? I think it's, I mean, the answer came out, the baby.
Yeah, for silent. Yeah.
So I'm thinking if during that, I'm not exactly sure how the abortion is done medically, but I think that there's also a risk for the mother to, I mean, for the woman in question, the young woman in question, to lose her life in the course of aborting. So would it not be fair to say that the mother and, well, the child first and the mother would pay the price, because she can pay the price with her own life in the event of trying, when they need to try to abort. She loses her own life. So she pays the price, not only the baby, but she would be at a risk.
Yeah, if she does die by a botched abortion, which does happen, yeah, that would be incredibly tragic. Yeah. Yeah. As much as that would be a tragedy, and I don't think the news would highlight that happening here in Canada. I do think legal abortion is pretty routine at this point too. So it's definitely, yeah, the child as the primary victim. There's no such thing as a safe abortion. Every successful abortion kills half the people who are involved in it, right? Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. Any other questions? Sorry? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming and for your questions. And it's my understanding there's refreshments in the back there, right, Peter? And we can continue the conversation back there. So thank you for coming. Awesome.